My grandpa left me $100,000 in his will. For 6 months, my uncle swore the check was lost in the mail, while my mother told me I was selfish for asking about it. I slept in a freezing townhouse wearing a winter coat while they stalled. I stopped asking. I hired a litigator instead. The night I walked into the family dining room with a deputy sheriff, my uncle slid a check for $5,000 across the table and called it charity. I left his money on the wood. I just watched the blood leave his face when the deputy handed him the lawsuit and a color copy of the canceled check, proving they cashed my inheritance 3 months ago. Welcome back to Aura Vengeance, where the quietest person in the room is usually the one holding the receipts. If a toxic family ever expected you to shrink yourself for their comfort, drop a comment with your age and let me know where you are listening from tonight. And make sure to subscribe so you do not miss the payoff on this one. The reality of what my family was doing clicked into place on a Tuesday evening outside a West Des Moines Ford dealership. Frost was creeping up the edges of my windshield. The dashboard clock read 7:14. I kept my car engine off to avoid drawing attention, letting my breath plume in the freezing cabin. Through the passenger window, I watched my cousin Bradley sign a thick stack of paperwork on the hood of a brand-new lifted F250. The paint was pristine white under the harsh sodium lights. The salesman handed him a set of keys. Bradley laughed and clapped the man on the shoulder before climbing into the cab. The deep rumble of the diesel engine vibrated through the frozen pavement, shaking the floorboards of my sedan as he pulled out onto the avenue. I am a supply chain analyst for an agricultural logistics firm. My entire professional existence revolves around tracking missing assets, reconciling discrepancies, and identifying when numbers fail to align with reality. I watched the taillights of that truck disappear down the road, and I ran the math. A truck in that trim level retails for $85,000. Bradley owned a landscaping company that had not secured a commercial contract in 2 years. I knew his credit score sat somewhere in the high 500s because my mother, Brenda, spent Thanksgiving complaining about how the local credit union denied his application for a basic mower loan. To drive that truck off the lot today, a buyer with his financial history would need to hand over at least $15,000 in certified funds. Yet for the past 6 months, my family operated under a strict, unified narrative. The estate was locked, probate was a nightmare, everyone was broke. The paradox sat heavy in my chest, tight and cold. If the family accounts were frozen, where did Bradley get the cash? 6 months prior, the atmosphere in the family attorney office had been very different. We were gathered in an oak-paneled conference room to read my grandfather's will. Grandpa was a pragmatic man who built a farming operation out of sheer stubbornness. When the lawyer slid the documents across the table, the distribution was straightforward. The bulk of the acreage went to my Uncle Richard and my mother. It was what they expected. Then the lawyer cleared his throat and read paragraph 4. It detailed a $100,000 cash bequest held in a liquid trust specifically for me. The silence that settled over the conference room was thick enough to choke on. Uncle Richard shifted in his leather chair, and his jaw set into a hard, flat line. My mother suddenly found the stitching on her handbag fascinating, refusing to look in my direction. Neither of them offered a single word of congratulations. Grandpa knew them better than they knew themselves. When I was 10 years old, I used to sit on his knee at the farmhouse kitchen table while he balanced the seasonal ledgers. He would run a thick, calloused finger down the columns of fertilizer costs and yield projections. "Paper does not lie, Ellie," he told me once, tapping the ledger with the eraser end of his pencil. "People lie. They tell you what they want you to hear, or what makes them look good. But if you want the truth about what a man values, you look at where his money moves. Always trust the paper." Sitting in my freezing car, his words echoed in the tight space. I turned the ignition key. The Honda sputtered to life, the weak heater struggling to push tepid air through the vents. I drove back to my townhouse in the suburbs. Opening the front door offered no relief from the bitter Iowa wind. The digital thermostat on the hallway wall read 48 degrees. My HVAC unit had failed 2 days ago, right at the onset of a brutal Midwestern cold snap. The repair company quoted me $6,000 for a full replacement. That was money I did not have in my checking account. I kept my winter coat on, wrapped a wool blanket around my shoulders, and sat on the edge of the sofa. My fingers were stiff as I dialed Uncle Richard's number. He was the executor of the estate. The probate waiting period had cleared a month ago. He answered on the fourth ring. The faint sound of a television playing a basketball game hummed in the background. "Stella, honey, it is late." His tone was smooth and practiced. "Uncle Richard, my furnace is dead." I pulled the blanket tighter around my neck. The technician said the heat exchanger is cracked. I really need to know the status of the estate check. A heavy, exaggerated sigh transmitted through the speaker. "I told you last week, Stella. The bank issued the drafts, but the post office is backed up. We are dealing with bureaucratic red tape. It must be lost in the mail. You just need to give it a little more time." "Registered estate mail does not just vanish without a trace," I said, keeping my voice level. "Do you have the tracking number?" "I am dealing with the postmaster directly," he deflected. His tone hardened just enough to serve as a warning. "We are all grieving, Stella. We are all tight on funds right now. You calling me every few days asking for cash does not make the mail move faster." He hung up the phone before I could ask another question. I lowered the phone to my lap. The house was dead quiet, save for the wind rattling the window panes. My uncle claimed everyone was tight on funds. My mother claimed the estate was frozen. But Bradley was currently driving an $85,000 truck with dealer plates. I pulled my laptop from my work bag and opened a blank spreadsheet. I did not need to ask them for permission to understand the delay anymore. I needed to audit my own family. Winter tightened its grip on the Midwest with the kind of unforgiving cold that cracks engine blocks and freezes pipes solid. By Wednesday morning, the temperature inside my living room had plummeted to 41 degrees. I woke up shivering under 3 layers of quilts. Every breath I took materialized as a white cloud in the gray morning light. I walked into the kitchen, wrapped in a fleece blanket, and turned on the stove burners just to thaw my hands. The repair estimate sat on the counter, staring back at me. $6,000. I needed a furnace, and I needed it before the water lines burst and flooded the drywall, ruining the only property I owned. I opened my laptop and drafted a formal email to Uncle Richard. I removed any trace of frustration from my words. I kept the language strictly professional, asking for a $6,000 advance against my inheritance. I noted that as the executor, he held the fiduciary authority to disperse partial funds from the liquid trust to cover emergency living expenses. I hit send and watched the little paper airplane icon swoosh away into the digital void. The reply did not come from Richard. 30 minutes later, my cell phone buzzed against the granite of the kitchen island. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. Brenda Thomas never called before 9 in the morning unless she needed to manage a crisis. In our family dynamics, a crisis was historically defined as anyone asking my uncle to take responsibility for his actions. I answered the call and put her on speakerphone, keeping my hands near the warmth of the open flame. "Stella, what on earth are you doing?" she asked. Her voice carried that familiar, polished edge. It was the exact tone she used at church bake sales when someone brought store-bought cookies instead of baking them from scratch. "I am trying to keep my pipes from freezing, Mom. My furnace is dead." "Put on a sweater," she snapped. "Richard called me in tears this morning. You are harassing him with these demands for advances. The man is grieving his father, Stella. He is working around the clock to settle this estate, and you are treating him like a personal ATM machine." I stared at the blue flame of the gas burner. My grandfather died 8 months ago. Richard was not grieving. He was stalling. My mother had spent her entire adult life running interference for the men in our bloodline, smoothing over their failures and policing my reactions so they never had to face consequences. "I am not harassing him," I said. "I am asking for a fraction of what Grandpa left me so I can survive a blizzard in my own home." "The money is tied up," Brenda insisted. "You just lack patience. You have always been this way. Stop making this entire tragedy about you." She terminated the call. She never once asked if I was warm. 10 minutes later, an email arrived from Richard. It contained no greeting. There was no text in the body of the message. He sent a single forwarded tracking link from the United States Postal Service. I clicked the blue text. The official postal website loaded, showing a green progress bar. The status read as in transit, arriving late. It showed the item had departed a regional sorting facility in Omaha 2 days prior. For a brief window of time, I exhaled. A wave of relief washed over the anxiety. I let myself believe the narrative. It was just bureaucratic incompetence. The post office was understaffed. The winter storms were delaying transit routes across the state. They were telling the truth, and I was just being paranoid. For 4 days, I refreshed that tracking page every morning and every night. I sat next to a tiny ceramic space heater I bought at a local hardware store, watching the metal coils glow orange, while the web page stubbornly displayed the exact same delayed status. But professional habits are deeply ingrained. When you spend 40 hours a week optimizing freight routes, tracking agricultural yields, and penalizing vendors for shipping discrepancies, you develop a subconscious rhythm for how items move across a map. On the 5th night, I looked at the tracking data much closer. I clicked the drop-down arrow to expand the shipment details menu. The weight class was listed as 3.2 pounds. The package type was designated as a priority mailbox for Zone 4. My fingers paused over the trackpad. Estate checks are legal tenders. They are mailed in flat, rigid cardboard envelopes via certified mail with signature confirmation required. A certified flat envelope weighs less than 4 ounces. Richard had not mailed me a check. He had provided a tracking number for a 3-pound box of random merchandise moving through the Omaha hub. It was a decoy, a string of numbers meant to keep me quiet and occupied while I froze in my own home. I picked up my phone and drafted a text message to my uncle. I stripped away all the polite family pretenses. The tracking number you sent is for a parcel weighing over 3 pounds. A cashier check weighs a fraction of an ounce. What exactly is in that box, Richard? The typing bubble appeared on my screen almost instantly. He was awake, and he was watching his phone. The bubbles vanished, appeared again, vanished again. He was calculating his next move. He did not reply to the text message. Instead, my email inbox chimed loudly in the quiet room. Richard forwarded a message with the subject line marked, "Urgent Probate Liquidity Hold." I opened the thread. The message appeared to be from a branch manager at the regional bank handling my grandfather's trust account. The text was thick with heavy financial jargon, explaining that due to an unexpected audit of the agricultural assets, all liquid distributions were temporarily frozen by the compliance department. The manager profusely apologized to Richard for the delay and asked for his continued patience while the legal team sorted out the acreage valuations. Richard added his own note at the top of the chain. "See for yourself, Stella. My hands are tied by the compliance office. Stop questioning my integrity." I read the banking email twice. The terminology sounded highly authoritative. The signature block contained the correct branch address, a direct phone number, and a crisp corporate logo. I leaned closer to the screen. The orange glow of the space heater illuminated the keyboard, casting long shadows across my desk. My eyes drifted up from the professional signature block to the sender routing data hidden in the header. When you audit vendor invoices for a living, you learn very quickly that the devil never hides in the text. The devil hides in the metadata. I stared at the email address of the supposed branch manager. It read, compliance@wellsfargo.com. Wells Fargo, spelled with only one L. The oxygen left my lungs. My uncle had not just forwarded a banking update. He had actively registered a fake web domain. He had created a dummy email account. He had typed out a fraudulent compliance notice, pretending to be a bank manager, just to shut me up. This was no longer a simple story about a slow postal service or a stubborn executor. You do not register fake corporate domains to cover up a simple mail delay. You do it to cover up a crime. The invitation to Sunday dinner arrived as a group text on Thursday afternoon. It was not a suggestion. In my family, Sunday dinners at the old farmhouse were mandatory command performances designed to project an image of Midwestern unity to anyone who might be watching. Attendance was expected, compliance was required, and questioning the patriarch was strictly forbidden. I drove up the long gravel driveway as the winter sun began its early descent, dipping below the bare branches of the oak trees. The farmhouse stood exactly as it had for 5 decades. White siding, wraparound porch, and a red brick chimney pumping thick wood smoke into the freezing air. The only new addition to the landscape was the gleaming white F250 parked aggressively near the front steps, taking up the space of 2 vehicles. I parked my Honda near the barn and walked up to the porch. The warmth of the house hit me the second I opened the heavy oak door. It smelled like roasting beef and buttery yeast rolls, the kind of aggressive domestic comfort that makes you feel guilty for harboring any suspicion. The dining room table was set for 8. My aunt and uncle from the next county over were already seated, nursing glasses of red wine. Bradley was leaning against the kitchen island, gripping a beer bottle, talking loudly over the hum of the oven exhaust fan. "I am telling you, the commercial market is finally opening up," Bradley proclaimed, taking a swig. "We just landed a huge seasonal contract for the new subdivision out on County Road 9. The business has completely turned a corner." He was lying. I ran the supplier manifests for half the construction firms in that zip code. Development on County Road 9 had been paused for environmental review since October. There was no seasonal contract. Uncle Richard stood nearby, carving the roast with precise, measured slices. He beamed with pride. "That is what I like to hear, son. Hard work pays off. You make the right investments, you reap the rewards." I took off my coat and hung it in the hallway closet. My fingers were still numb from the drive. I walked into the dining room and took my assigned seat. My mother was bustling around the table adjusting the silverware. She stopped and smoothed her hands over her apron. "Stella, honey, you look so pale. Are you eating enough?" "I am fine, Mom," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Just a little cold." She clicked her tongue sympathetically and pointed toward the table settings. "Look at the name cards I made. I spent 3 hours last night practicing my script. Calligraphy is a dying art, you know. Nobody takes the time to master perfect penmanship anymore." I looked down at the heavy cream-colored cardstock resting above my dinner plate. The word Stella was written in flowing, flawless black ink. The capital S was distinct, featuring a sweeping, dramatic loop that curled elegantly back on itself before connecting to the lowercase letters. It was beautiful. It was precise. It was the handwriting of a woman who prided herself on controlling every tiny detail of her environment. We sat down to eat. The conversation flowed around me, touching on the incoming snowstorm, local farming subsidies, and the rising cost of diesel fuel. Bradley continued to steer the conversation back to the towing capacity of his new truck, detailing the leather interior and the premium sound system. I cut my meat into small, even squares. I chewed, I swallowed, and I waited for a lull in the noise. When my aunt asked Richard how the estate settlement was progressing, the room naturally quieted down. "Oh, it's nearly finalized," Richard said, waving a hand dismissively. "Just a few minor tax filings left to clear. The bulk of the heavy lifting is behind us." I set my fork down. The silver clinked against the porcelain plate. It was a small sound, but in that room it carried the weight of a gavel. "That is wonderful news, Uncle Richard," I said. My voice was calm, pleasant, and carefully modulated. "Since the heavy lifting is done, did the compliance department at Wells Fargo resolve their internal audit yet? The one that caused the liquidity hold?" The silence that followed was absolute. Bradley stopped mid-chew. My aunt looked back and forth between us, her brow furrowed in confusion. Richard slowly placed the carving knife down on the serving platter. The genial, proud patriarch vanished, replaced instantly by a man who recognized a threat to his authority. The deep red flush of anger started at his collar and crept up his neck. "We are not discussing banking business at the dinner table, Stella," he warned. I just wanted to make sure the manager cleared the hold I pressed, maintaining eye contact. I know how stressful those audits can be, especially when there are unexpected delays. Brenda slammed her water glass down on the table. The dark liquid sloshed over the rim, staining the pristine white tablecloth. "This is exactly what I mean," she snapped, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "Your uncle works tirelessly to keep this family afloat, to honor your grandfather's legacy, and you sit there interrogating him like a criminal. You are obsessed with money, Stella. It is unbecoming. You are ruining Sunday dinner." "I am just asking for an update on the timeline," I replied, my voice refusing to rise to meet hers. "My furnace is still broken." "Then buy a space heater," Richard barked, leaning forward. "I am sick and tired of your greed. Bradley is out here building a business, making something of himself, while you sit in that townhouse waiting for a handout. The estate will settle when it settles. Until then, you need to learn some respect." The room collectively held its breath. Bradley smirked into his beer bottle. My aunt looked away, embarrassed by the display. The old version of me would have crumbled. The girl who grew up in this house, the one conditioned to absorb the blame to keep the peace, would have apologized. She would have cried, felt the sting of shame, and retreated. But I was not that girl anymore. I was a logistics analyst who knew the tracking number was fake and the banking email was forged. I looked around the table. I saw the arrogant pride radiating from Richard. I saw the smug entitlement dripping from Bradley. I saw my mother, clutching her perfectly calligraphed name cards, choosing the comfort of a lie over the freezing reality of her daughter. I did not shed a tear. I absorbed the abuse, cataloging every micro-expression, every defensive pivot, every fabricated excuse. They were coordinating a cover-up in real time, and they were using emotional manipulation to maintain the perimeter. "You are right, Uncle Richard," I said softly, picking up my fork. "I apologize for bringing it up. It was inappropriate." The tension in the room instantly deflated. Richard exhaled a harsh breath, running a hand over his thinning hair. Brenda visibly relaxed, satisfied that the order of the universe had been restored. The family had collectively beaten down the dissenting voice, and the performance could resume. They began discussing the upcoming football season. The volume returned to normal. I took another bite of the roast. I chewed methodically, the meat tasting like ash in my mouth. I waited exactly 12 minutes, letting the conversation drift safely away from the estate. Then I pushed my chair back from the table. "Excuse me," I murmured. "I need to use the restroom." I walked down the hallway, keeping my steps light. I slipped into the guest bathroom and locked the door behind me. The porcelain tiles were cold under my feet. I leaned against the sink, looking at my reflection in the mirror over the vanity. My face was pale, but my eyes were sharp, focused, entirely devoid of the fear they expected to see. I pulled my cell phone from my back pocket. I opened my contacts list and scrolled down to a number I had saved 3 years ago. During a brief stint in college, I had dated a guy whose older sister worked as a paralegal at the exact law firm my grandfather used to draft his trust. We had not spoken in years, but I knew she still worked there. I typed out a message, keeping it brief and urgent. "Hi, Sarah. It is Stella Thomas. I know it has been a while, but I need a massive favor. I need to come into the office tomorrow morning regarding my grandfather's trust. It is an emergency. Can you squeeze me in?" I hit send. I stood in the quiet bathroom listening to the muffled sounds of my family laughing down the hall. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully shamed me into submission. My phone buzzed in my hand. The reply illuminated the dark screen. "I can get you in at 9 a.m., Stella. Come to the side entrance." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I unlocked the bathroom door and walked back into the dining room to finish my dinner. The law offices of Sterling and Vance occupied the second floor of a mid-century brick building in downtown Des Moines. It was the kind of establishment that smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, where the mahogany wainscoting was authentic and the silence felt expensive. I arrived at 8:55, pushing through the heavy glass doors on the side entrance, exactly as Sarah instructed. Sarah was waiting at the reception desk. She looked older than I remembered, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe, practical bun. She offered a tight, professional smile and motioned for me to follow her down a narrow hallway away from the main client waiting area. Mr. Sterling is in court all morning, she said, her voice dropping to a low hum as we passed a row of closed office doors. I am not supposed to schedule walk-ins without his approval. But you said it was an emergency. What is going on? Stella, she ushered me into a small file room filled with towering rows of manila folders and banker boxes. The air was dry and smelled heavily of toner ink. I unbuttoned my wool coat, carefully calibrating my posture. I needed to project confusion, not accusation. I had to play the part of the slightly disorganized beneficiary. If I came in demanding an audit, Sarah would have to notify the attorney, and the attorney would notify Uncle Richard. It is probably nothing major, I said, offering a self-deprecating laugh. I just moved into a new townhouse a few months ago, and the post office has been a nightmare with forwarding my mail. Uncle Richard mentioned that my inheritance check might have gotten lost in the shuffle. I just wanted to update my physical address on the official ledger and see if the stop payment order went through so we can issue a replacement draft. Sarah frowned, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. Richard initiated a stop payment order. That is highly unusual. The bank usually flags those requests if the check amount exceeds $50,000. He said the compliance department was handling it. I lied, seamlessly parroting Richard's fabricated email. I just do not want to cause any more headaches for him. The probate process has been stressful enough on the family. Let me pull the trust ledger, Sarah murmured, turning toward a long bank of filing cabinets. It will only take a second to verify the dispersal status. I stood, perfectly still, watching her fingers walk across the tabs of the alphabetized folders. My heart thumped a heavy, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I had spent the last 24 hours convincing myself that Richard was just hoarding the cash, perhaps using the liquid funds to float his own debts temporarily before paying me out. Embezzlement is a slow, creeping process, often born of desperation rather than malice. Sarah pulled a thick red folder from the cabinet and laid it flat on a small reading table. She flipped past several pages of legalese, her eyes scanning the columns of dates and financial figures. She stopped. Her finger hovered over a specific line item on the third page. The frown on her face deepened into a look of genuine bewilderment. Stella, there is no stop payment order on this file, she said, her voice losing its professional detachment. Maybe the bank has not processed the paperwork yet. I suggested stepping closer to the table. No, Sarah said, shaking her head slowly. She tapped the paper. You do not understand. A stop payment cannot be issued because the draft is no longer outstanding. The ledger shows the dispersal check was drafted, mailed, and received. The funds cleared the primary estate trust account 3.5 months ago. The air in the file room grew thick and heavy. The ambient hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly sounded deafening. Cleared, I repeated. The word tasted metallic on my tongue. Are you absolutely certain? The accounting software is tied directly to the banking portal, she explained, turning the folder so I could see the printed columns. Look right here. $100,000 dispersed. Status indicates fully cleared and settled. If the check was lost in the mail, the status would read as pending. I stared at the black ink on the white paper. The numbers were crisp, unyielding, and utterly devoid of empathy. The money was not delayed. The money was not frozen by compliance audits. The money was gone. Who endorsed it? I asked. My voice sounded hollow, as if it were coming from a great distance. I do not have access to the actual canceled check images. Sarah replied, gently closing the folder. Only the executor or the primary account holder can request the physical copies from the bank. But Stella, a check of that magnitude requires a direct signature and matching identification to clear the clearinghouse. It cannot just be deposited by anyone. The physical shock hit me like a physical blow. A cold sweat broke out across my shoulder blades. The facade of the disorganized beneficiary crumbled instantly. This was no longer a case of a stubborn uncle stalling for time. This was a calculated, coordinated felony. Someone in my family had intercepted registered estate mail. Someone had bypassed stringent banking security protocols. Someone had taken $100,000 that did not belong to them. And based on the $85,000 truck sitting in the farmhouse driveway, I had a very clear idea of where a large portion of that money went. I thanked Sarah profusely, apologizing for taking up her time. I walked out of the law office and down the stairs, my legs feeling leaden and clumsy. I pushed through the glass doors and stepped out into the freezing Midwestern morning. The snow had begun to fall again, fine, powdery flakes that stung my cheeks. I stood on the sidewalk, surrounded by the bustling morning commute of downtown Des Moines. People in heavy coats hurried past me, clutching coffee cups, their breath pluming in the icy air. The world was moving forward, while my entire reality fractured. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped it onto the snow-covered pavement. I snatched it up, brushing the moisture from the screen. I had to know. I had to give them one final opportunity to step off the ledge. I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring. "Stella, I am in the middle of preparing for the church luncheon. Make this quick." "I just left the estate attorney's office, Mom." I did not bother with pleasantries. I went straight for the nerve. I spoke with the paralegal. The check was not lost in the mail. The money cleared the estate account over 3 months ago. There was a pause on the line. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but in that brief window of silence, I heard the microscopic intake of breath, the sudden cessation of background movement, the telltale hesitation of a predator realizing it has been spotted. Then the pivot occurred. It was flawless, smooth, and terrifyingly practiced. "What are you talking about?" Brenda demanded, her voice spiking with indignation. "Why are you sneaking around law offices behind your uncle's back? Have you lost your mind? The money cleared Mom. The ledger proves it. Where is my inheritance?" "That paralegal is an idiot." She hissed the words, clipping sharply over the connection. "She's probably looking at the wrong file, or the bank miscoded the transfer. You are taking the word of some low-level secretary over your own family. You sound completely hysterical, Stella. You are paranoid and you are acting unstable. I saw the ledger. I pushed back, refusing to yield ground. "You saw a piece of paper that you do not even understand how to read," Brenda countered, her tone dripping with condescension. "You are embarrassing yourself, and you are embarrassing me. If Richard finds out you went behind his back, he will be furious. Go home, Stella. Calm down and stop this nonsense before you cause permanent damage to this family." She hung up. I stood on the sidewalk listening to the dial tone. She did not ask questions. She did not express shock that $100,000 was missing. She immediately attacked my sanity and questioned my competence. She gaslighted me with the precision of a seasoned operative. The cold reality settled deep into my bones, chilling me far more effectively than the winter wind. They were never going to give me the money. They were going to stall, lie, and manipulate me until I simply gave up or went crazy trying to prove the truth. I could not fight this alone. A supply chain analyst can track the missing assets, but it takes a different kind of professional to force a thief to open the vault. I needed someone who did not care about Sunday dinners or Midwestern politeness. I needed a predator. I opened the web browser on my phone. My fingers were steady now, the shaking replaced by a cold, rigid focus. I typed a specific query into the search bar: "Ruthless probate litigator, Des Moines, Iowa." The search engine returned several results. I scrolled past the sponsored ads and the friendly family law practices. I was looking for a shark. I found a name associated with civil theft recovery and aggressive fiduciary litigation. I tapped the screen and initiated the call. I opened my laptop and drafted a formal email to Uncle Richard. I removed any trace of frustration from my words. I kept the language strictly professional, asking for a $6,000 advance against my inheritance. I noted that as the executor, he held the fiduciary authority to disperse partial funds from the liquid trust to cover emergency living expenses. I hit send and watched the little paper airplane icon swoosh away into the digital void. The reply did not come from Richard. 30 minutes later, my cell phone buzzed against the granite of the kitchen island. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. Brenda Thomas never called before 9 in the morning unless she needed to manage a crisis. In our family dynamics, a crisis was historically defined as anyone asking my uncle to take responsibility for his actions. I answered the call and put her on speakerphone, keeping my hands near the warmth of the open flame. "Stella, what on earth are you doing?" she asked. Her voice carried that familiar, polished edge. It was the exact tone she used at church bake sales when someone brought store-bought cookies instead of baking them from scratch. "I am trying to keep my pipes from freezing, Mom. My furnace is dead." "Put on a sweater," she snapped. "Richard called me in tears this morning. You are harassing him with these demands for advances. The man is grieving his father, Stella. He is working around the clock to settle this estate, and you are treating him like a personal ATM machine." I stared at the blue flame of the gas burner. My grandfather died 8 months ago. Richard was not grieving. He was stalling. My mother had spent her entire adult life running interference for the men in our bloodline, smoothing over their failures and policing my reactions so they never had to face consequences. "I am not harassing him," I said. "I am asking for a fraction of what Grandpa left me so I can survive a blizzard in my own home." "The money is tied up," Brenda insisted. "You just lack patience. You have always been this way. Stop making this entire tragedy about you." She terminated the call. She never once asked if I was warm. 10 minutes later, an email arrived from Richard. It contained no greeting. There was no text in the body of the message. He sent a single forwarded tracking link from the United States Postal Service. I clicked the blue text. The official postal website loaded, showing a green progress bar. The status read as "in transit, arriving late." It showed the item had departed a regional sorting facility in Omaha 2 days prior. For a brief window of time, I exhaled. A wave of relief washed over the anxiety. I let myself believe the narrative. It was just bureaucratic incompetence. The post office was understaffed. The winter storms were delaying transit routes across the state. They were telling the truth, and I was just being paranoid. For 4 days, I refreshed that tracking page every morning and every night. I sat next to a tiny ceramic space heater I bought at a local hardware store, watching the metal coils glow orange while the web page stubbornly displayed the exact same delayed status. But professional habits are deeply ingrained. When you spend 40 hours a week optimizing freight routes, tracking agricultural yields, and penalizing vendors for shipping discrepancies, you develop a subconscious rhythm for how items move across a map. On the 5th night, I looked at the tracking data much closer. I clicked the drop-down arrow to expand the shipment details menu. The weight class was listed as 3.2 pounds. The package type was designated as a priority mailbox for Zone 4. My fingers paused over the trackpad. Estate checks are legal tenders. They are mailed in flat, rigid cardboard envelopes via certified mail, with signature confirmation required. A certified flat envelope weighs less than 4 ounces. Richard had not mailed me a check. He had provided a tracking number for a 3-pound box of random merchandise moving through the Omaha hub. It was a decoy, a string of numbers meant to keep me quiet and occupied while I froze in my own home. I picked up my phone and drafted a text message to my uncle. I stripped away all the polite family pretenses. "The tracking number you sent is for a parcel weighing over 3 pounds. A cashier check weighs a fraction of an ounce. What exactly is in that box, Richard?" The typing bubble appeared on my screen almost instantly. He was awake, and he was watching his phone. The bubbles vanished, appeared again, vanished again. He was calculating his next move. He did not reply to the text message. Instead, my email inbox chimed loudly in the quiet room. Richard forwarded a message with the subject line marked "Urgent Probate Liquidity Hold." I opened the thread. The message appeared to be from a branch manager at the regional bank handling my grandfather's trust account. The text was thick with heavy financial jargon, explaining that due to an unexpected audit of the agricultural assets, all liquid distributions were temporarily frozen by the compliance department. The manager profusely apologized to Richard for the delay and asked for his continued patience while the legal team sorted out the acreage valuations. Richard added his own note at the top of the chain. "See for yourself, Stella. My hands are tied by the compliance office. Stop questioning my integrity." I read the banking email twice. The terminology sounded highly authoritative. The signature block contained the correct branch address, a direct phone number, and a crisp corporate logo. I leaned closer to the screen. The orange glow of the space heater illuminated the keyboard, casting long shadows across my desk. My eyes drifted up from the professional signature block to the sender routing data hidden in the header. 3 hours after Uncle Richard slid a $20,000 hush money check across a coffee shop table, I walked into a local credit union. He had presented the cashier check as a gesture of good faith, a partial dispersal of my inheritance. But the money came with strings attached. He required my signature on a 20-page indemnity waiver, holding him harmless from all future claims regarding the estate. I had feigned ignorance, telling him I needed time to review the dense legal jargon. I took the document and the draft and left. Now I sat in a sterile cubicle across from a loan officer. I was requesting a $30,000 unsecured personal loan. The interest rate was predatory, hovering just below 18%. The loan officer reviewed my modest salary as a supply chain analyst and asked what the funds were for. I told him it was for legal retainers. He warned me about the crippling monthly payments. I did not care. I signed the promissory note pledging my entire financial future, betting every dollar of my non-existent safety net on the paper trail. With the loan approved and the funds wired, I drove directly to the law offices of Marcus Thorne. The environment stood in stark contrast to the mahogany and leather warmth of my grandfather's estate attorney. Marcus operated out of a converted industrial loft. The floors were polished concrete. The desks were tempered glass and brushed steel. There were no oil paintings of hunting dogs on the walls. This was not a place where polite Midwestern gentlemen shook hands over property disputes. This was a place where financial predators dissected their prey. Marcus was a bulldog litigator specializing in probate fraud. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and a watch that likely cost more than my car. He did not offer me a coffee or exchange pleasantries about the winter weather. He sat behind his glass desk, steepled his fingers, and waited for me to speak. I opened my briefcase. I arranged the evidence on the transparent surface with the precision of a prosecutor. First, I laid down the printed email chain featuring the fake Wells Fargo compliance notice with the misspelled web domain. Second, I produced the thick, unexecuted indemnity and release of claims waiver Richard had demanded I sign. Finally, I placed the $20,000 cashier check right in the center of the desk. Marcus picked up the fake banking email. His eyes scanned the header data. A faint, humorless smile touched the corner of his mouth. He set it down and picked up the indemnity waiver, flipping straight to the exculpatory clauses buried on page 14. "Your uncle drafted this himself," Marcus observed, his voice sharp and clinical. "Or he hired a very cheap attorney. This clause attempts to absolve the executor of any gross negligence or intentional misappropriation of funds. No judge in the state of Iowa would uphold this waiver." He said, "The rest of my inheritance would be released in installments once the audit cleared," I explained, keeping my posture rigid. He said this $20,000 was just to help me replace my broken furnace. Marcus dropped the waiver and picked up the cashier check. He held it by the edges, inspecting the watermarks and the printed routing numbers along the bottom edge. "Stella, they did not just steal from you," Marcus said, locking his gaze with mine. "They committed a felony. The fake email constitutes wire fraud. Attempting to coerce a beneficiary into signing a liability release under false pretenses is extortion. And the missing $80,000 represents grand theft. I just want to know where the money went." Marcus tapped the bottom left corner of the cashier check. "This piece of paper is a map. Your uncle thought he was buying your silence, but he actually handed us the exact digital coordinates of the stolen funds. This routing sequence belongs to a regional bank in Cedar Rapids. This specific draft was drawn from a commercial holding account, not the primary estate trust." He opened his laptop and began typing with rapid, forceful keystrokes. "I am filing an emergency ex parte motion to compel discovery," Marcus stated. "We are going to subpoena the transaction history for every account linked to this routing sequence. Thanks, respond to court-ordered subpoenas regarding suspected felony fraud very quickly." "How long will it take?" I asked. The reality of the debt I just incurred was pressing down on my chest. 3 to 5 business days, Marcus replied. Go home. Do not answer any phone calls from your uncle or your mother. Do not text your cousin. You are a ghost until I have the bank records in my hand. I left the industrial loft and returned to my townhouse. The wait began. Those 4 days tested the limits of my psychological endurance. The Midwestern blizzard continued to punish the city outside my windows. The temperature inside my home refused to rise above 40 degrees. I wore my heavy winter coat indoors, layering wool socks and thick gloves just to operate my computer. The small ceramic space heater clicked on and off, providing only a localized radius of warmth. The physical discomfort was punishing, but the mental isolation was far worse. I sat in the freezing silence, dissecting every interaction I ever had with my family. Doubt crept into the corners of my mind. What if Richard had a legitimate reason for moving the money? What if the commercial holding account was a standard estate tax maneuver? What if I just ruined my relationship with my mother and saddled myself with $30,000 of high-interest debt based on a paranoid theory? I watched my neighbors across the street through the frosted glass. Their chimneys puffed steady streams of white smoke, indicating warm, comfortable living rooms. My family was out there living in that same comfort. Bradley was driving his pristine truck. Richard was carving roast beef. Brenda was practicing her elegant calligraphy. They were warm and secure, while I froze, paying the price for asking questions. I checked my phone constantly. The screen remained dark. Every hour felt like a physical weight dragging me deeper into a state of frozen anxiety. The weekend crawled past in a blur of shivering sleep and cold canned soup. By Monday evening, I was ready to surrender. I drafted an apology text to my mother, staring at the flashing cursor. I thought about hitting send, begging for forgiveness, and asking Richard to just let me cash the $20,000 so I could hire a heating technician. I remembered my grandfather's voice. Always trust the paper. I deleted the drafted text and turned off the phone. Tuesday morning arrived with a pale, unyielding light. I was standing in the kitchen holding a mug of instant coffee, trying to absorb the heat through the ceramic, when my phone vibrated on the counter. The caller ID read, Marcus Thorne. I answered on the first ring, my breath catching in my throat. Stella, Marcus said. His voice lacked any trace of the clinical detachment from our previous meeting. It was tight, urgent, and edged with something resembling disbelief. Did the subpoena clear? I asked, gripping the edge of the granite counter. The bank complied late last night. I have the digital transaction logs and the canceled check images right in front of me. Where did the money go, Marcus? You need to get to my office right now, he instructed the command. Brokering, no argument. The results are in and the situation is worse than we thought. The drive through downtown Des Moines felt like navigating underwater. The heater in my Honda pushed tepid air against my frozen fingers, but the chill radiating from my bones had nothing to do with the winter weather. I parked in the concrete garage adjacent to the law firm. My boots crunched against the salted pavement as I walked toward the glass entry doors. The elevator ride to the top floor took 40 seconds. I counted every single floor indicator, watching the digital numbers climb higher, while my dread deepened. Marcus stood waiting by the reception desk. He held a thick manila folder tucked firmly under his left arm. He gestured for me to follow him into the main conference room. The space was dominated by a long, polished steel table. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the snow-covered city. He closed the heavy oak door behind us, sealing off the ambient noise of the busy law firm. The silence inside the room was heavy and expectant. Sit down, Stella, Marcus instructed. I took a seat in one of the ergonomic leather chairs. He sat directly across from me. He opened the manila folder but did not speak right away. He extracted a single sheet of standard printer paper and placed it face up on the gleaming steel surface. He used his index finger to slide it across the table until it rested directly in front of me. It was a high-resolution color photocopy of a bank draft. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cold table. The top left corner bore the official logo of the estate trust account. The date, printed near the top right corner, indicated the draft was issued exactly 106 days ago. The payee line read Stella Thomas. The numeric amount read $100,000 and 0 cents. The memo line contained a brief typed notation reading, "Final estate dispersal." "Turn it over," Marcus said, his voice unnervingly quiet. I reached out and flipped the paper. The back of the check displayed the standard gray security screen and the designated endorsement area. A signature occupied the top line. It was my name, written in dark blue ink. For a fraction of a second, my brain tried to reject the visual input. I searched my memory, trying to recall if I had somehow signed a document in a haze of grief during the funeral arrangements. But the handwriting was too ornate. It was too practiced. I stared at the first letter of my name. The capital S was distinct. It featured a sweeping, dramatic loop that curled elegantly back on itself before connecting to the lowercase letters. The proportions were exact. The ink pressure was deliberate. It was the exact same script from the cream-colored cardstock resting above my dinner plate at the farmhouse just a few days ago. The calligraphy, the flawless penmanship. The breath hitched in my throat. The edges of my vision darkened. My Uncle Richard did not sign this document. My cousin Bradley did not forge this endorsement. My mother did it. Brenda Thomas took a pen, traced the letters of her only daughter's name, and stole my inheritance. The memories of the past 6 months cascaded through my mind, fracturing and reassembling into a terrifying new reality. I thought about the phone calls. Every time I pressed Richard for an update, Brenda would intervene within minutes. She told me to put on a sweater when I was freezing. She called me selfish. She accused me of ruining Sunday dinner. She told the extended family I was hysterical and paranoid. I had believed she was simply fulfilling her lifelong role as the family peacekeeper, running interference to protect her brother from conflict. I was wrong. She was not managing family dynamics. She was managing a crime scene. She gaslighted me to keep herself out of a federal penitentiary. The profound devastation threatened to pull me under. The biological imperative to seek maternal comfort clashed sharply with the empirical evidence resting on the steel table. My own mother watched me suffer in a freezing townhouse. Knowing she had cashed the check meant to keep me warm. The betrayal was so deep, it felt physical, like a fractured rib. I closed my eyes, taking a long, measured breath. I pictured my grandfather sitting at his kitchen table tapping his ledgers. Paper does not lie. People lie. When I opened my eyes, the grieving daughter was gone. The supply chain analyst took her place. Emotion is a liability during an audit. Anger, however, is a highly effective fuel source when properly channeled. I straightened my posture. I looked at the endorsement again, categorizing it not as a familial betrayal, but as a point of evidentiary leverage. She is going to claim I authorized her to sign it on my behalf. I stated, my voice flat and devoid of any tremor. She will say I asked her to hold the funds for safekeeping. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as he registered the tactical shift in my demeanor. That is the standard defense in family fraud cases, Marcus agreed. But authorization requires a signed power of attorney or a notarized proxy directive. She possesses neither. The bank accepted the deposit because the signature matched the payee name and she presented it in person. We can prove it is her handwriting, I said, tapping the photocopy. I have dozens of greeting cards and place settings at home featuring this exact script. A forensic document examiner will match the loop dynamics in an hour. Proving she signed it is only the first step, Marcus cautioned. The criminal justice system moves slowly. If we want to recover the assets before they are entirely depleted, we have to follow the routing data. We need to freeze the destination accounts. I looked up from the forgery. Where did the funds go? Richard offered me $20,000 from a commercial holding account in Cedar Rapids. Bradley bought an $85,000 truck. That math leaves very little margin. I need to know the exact routing path of the original $100,000. Marcus opened the manila folder again. He pulled out a second sheet of paper. It was a printed spreadsheet containing dense rows of transactional data and alphanumeric routing codes extracted from the subpoena results. The money did not go directly into your uncle's business accounts, Marcus explained, tracing a line of data with his silver pen. In order to bypass the clearinghouse fraud protocols and avoid triggering an immediate red flag, the funds had to be deposited into an account bearing the name of the designated payee. I frowned, studying the sequence of numbers on the page. I only have one checking account and one savings account. Neither of those routing numbers match my current bank. That is because this account is not held at your current institution, Marcus replied, setting his pen down. He turned the spreadsheet toward me, highlighting a specific cell block. The forged check was deposited into a regional branch across town. It bounced through an intermediary holding account first, an account that legally bears your own name. I have not set foot inside a branch of that regional bank since I was a teenager, I said. My eyes traced the printed routing digits, attempting to reconcile the data with my own memory. I opened a basic savings account there when I was 13 years old to deposit money I earned from summer jobs. I stopped using it before I even left for college. Marcus tapped his silver pen against the spreadsheet. It was structured as a Uniform Transfers to Minors Act account, a custodial setup. Your mother had to sign the original paperwork as your legal guardian because you were underage. When you turned 18, the financial institution should have required you to transfer the balance to an individual account, but dormant accounts often slip through the administrative cracks. Your mother never removed herself as the joint custodian. The account remained open, empty, and waiting. The architecture of the theft was brilliantly simple. It relied entirely on the exploitation of a forgotten technicality. Walk me through the exact timeline I requested, leaning closer to the steel table. Marcus turned the page, revealing a chronological transaction log. At 9:14 on a Tuesday morning, Brenda walked into the local branch. She presented the forged inheritance check to the teller. The banking software scanned the payee line. It read, Stella Thomas. The system verified that an account existed bearing that exact name. Because your mother was legally listed as the joint custodian, her physical presence and her signature on the deposit slip satisfied the internal security protocols. The teller accepted the draft without triggering a single fraud alert. I stared at the timestamp, 9:14 in the morning. My mother committed a federal offense before most people finished their first cup of coffee. The funds cleared the clearinghouse instantly due to the size of the originating estate trust, Marcus continued. The $100,000 hit your dormant custodial account, but it did not stay there. Look at the next line item. I moved my gaze down one row. The timestamp read 9:28. Exactly 14 minutes after the initial deposit, a secondary transaction occurred. She initiated a domestic wire transfer, Marcus said. She drained the entire balance. The custodial account dropped back to zero. She utilized your name as a temporary ghost account, just long enough to wash the money and bounce it to its final destination. Where did the wire go? Marcus slid a final document across the table. It was a corporate registration printout from the Iowa Secretary of State. The receiving routing number belongs to a commercial operating account registered to Thomas Family Ag Ventures, he stated. I sat back in my chair. Thomas Family Ag Ventures was an agricultural supply LLC formed a decade ago by Uncle Richard and my mother. They operated out of a sprawling metal warehouse situated just off Interstate 80. For years, they portrayed themselves as highly successful local distributors, providing seed, fertilizer, and heavy machinery parts to independent farmers across the county. They hosted annual summer barbecues for their clients, projecting an image of untouchable Midwestern prosperity. They stole my inheritance to fund their own company, I murmured, trying to process the sheer audacity of the maneuver. We need to know why, Marcus replied, opening his laptop. People do not risk federal prison to pad the margins of a healthy business. They only take that kind of risk when the ship is sinking. Let us look at their public filings. Marcus accessed a commercial database utilizing his firm credentials to pull the most recent tax filings and public credit reports for the LLC. He turned the laptop screen toward me so I could view the digitized ledgers. This was my domain. I spent 40 hours a week auditing supply chains, identifying inefficiencies, and predicting market collapses based on freight movement. I did not need a law degree to read the story hidden inside those numbers. I scanned the Schedule C documents, focusing immediately on the cost of goods sold and the reported inventory turnover ratios. The figures were catastrophic. Look at their freight expenditures for the past 3 quarters, I pointed at the screen. The numbers are practically non-existent. You cannot run a regional agricultural distribution company without paying substantial shipping tariffs. If you are not paying freight, you are not moving product. Marcus nodded, following my analysis. What about the overhead? I pulled up the itemized operational deductions. Their utility expenditures for the main warehouse plummeted starting in October. The winter heating bills for a facility that size should be astronomical. They are reporting bare minimum electrical usage. They are not heating the building, Marcus. The warehouse is empty. They have no inventory. The puzzle pieces snapped together, forming a terrifyingly clear picture. The arrogant posturing at Sunday dinner, Richard's refusal to grant me a minor advance, my mother's fierce policing of my tone. It was all a desperate theater production. The business was functionally insolvent. They were drowning in commercial debt, facing imminent collapse. When my grandfather died and left me a liquid $100,000, they saw a lifeline. They cannibalized my future to resuscitate their hollow facade. This explains Bradley and his new truck, I said, the final piece falling into place. The nephew, Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. Bradley works as the floor manager at that warehouse, I explained. He handles the loading docks. He knew the shelves were empty. He knew the vendors stopped delivering. He knew the company was bankrupt. When a massive influx of cash suddenly hit the operating account and saved the business from foreclosure, Bradley would have asked questions. He is arrogant, but he is not blind. He realized where the money came from. Marcus deduced, resting his chin on his hand. Exactly, I said. And Richard could not risk his own son exposing the embezzlement. The $85,000 Ford F250 parked in the farmhouse driveway was not a reward for hard work. It was a bribe. They bought his silence. The power dynamics in the room shifted. A profound transformation occurred within my own mind. For 6 months, I had occupied the role of the helpless, freezing niece. I begged for scraps of my own money. I absorbed their insults and allowed them to dictate my reality. I looked at the tax filings and the forged check. They were not untouchable patriarchs and matriarchs holding all the cards. They were desperate, broke criminals clinging to a crumbling illusion. They were terrified. I did not feel cold anymore. I held the detonator. I possessed the legal and financial leverage to dismantle their entire lives. I could freeze their accounts, repossess their vehicles, and send them to prison with a single phone call. We file the lawsuit today, I told Marcus, my voice carrying a new, hardened authority. I want the accounts frozen. I want civil theft charges, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Marcus closed the laptop. He looked at me with a mixture of professional respect and grim caution. I will draft the filings immediately, Marcus agreed, but you need to understand the psychological warfare that is about to occur. We are about to back cornered animals into a very tight space. Your mother is highly manipulative. When she realizes you have stopped calling, when she senses the silence, she will know her control is slipping. What will she do? I asked. She will try to destroy your credibility before you can destroy hers, Marcus warned. She will initiate a smear campaign. She will poison the well with every relative, neighbor, and family friend. She has to paint you as unstable and irrational so that when the truth comes out, nobody believes you. I gathered my coat. I understood the assignment. I had the power to destroy them entirely, but first, I had to survive my mother's desperate attempt to ruin my reputation. The silence emanating from my end was the catalyst. For 6 months, I had been the predictable squeaky wheel. I called, I asked questions, I sent emails requesting updates on the probate timeline. I played the part of the anxious beneficiary perfectly. But after I left Marcus Thorne and his industrial loft with a photocopy of a forged check in my purse, I stopped communicating entirely. I did not text my mother. I ignored Richard's forwarded banking updates. In a family built on control, sudden silence is the loudest alarm bell you can ring. My mother recognized the shift within 48 hours. Renda Thomas was a woman who navigated Midwestern social circles with the tactical precision of a military general. She understood that if I was not complaining to her, I might be talking to someone else. She could not allow me to control the narrative. She had to isolate me, discredit my reputation, and establish a defensive perimeter before I could detonate the truth. The Whisper campaign began on a Thursday morning under the guise of Christian charity. My cell phone chimed while I was sitting at my kitchen island drinking instant coffee. It was a text message from my Aunt Susan, my father's sister, who lived 2 towns over. "Praying for you, sweetie," the message read. "Your mom told us what you were going through. Please let us know if you need groceries or a warm place to sleep. Mental health struggles are nothing to be ashamed of." I stared at the screen. Before I could process the implication, a second message arrived, this one from my cousin Emily. "Hey Stella, heard about the townhouse. If you need a small personal loan to get your heater fixed, let me know. Do not do anything rash. We all love you." Over the next 4 hours, 6 different relatives reached out. The messages were draped in suffocating sympathy, but the underlying subtext was identical. They pitied me. They were handling me with kid gloves. I decided to call Aunt Susan. I needed to know exactly what script my mother was circulating. Susan answered with a hushed, tender tone reserved for hospital waiting rooms. "Oh, Stella, honey, I am so glad you called. We have been so worried." "Worried about what, Aunt Susan?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Your mother called me crying last night," Susan explained, her voice thick with secondhand sorrow. "She said the stress of the broken furnace finally broke you. She told us you are drowning in terrible credit card debt, and it is causing you to have these paranoid delusions about your grandfather's will. She said you are demanding money that does not exist and accusing your uncle of hiding things." I closed my eyes. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Brenda took my very real freezing reality and weaponized it. She transformed my legitimate inquiries into symptoms of a psychological breakdown. "She told you I am having delusions," I clarified. "She's just trying to protect you," Susan rushed to reassure me. "She knows you are not in your right mind. Financial stress can make people imagine crazy scenarios. Richard is doing everything he can to settle the estate, but you cannot keep harassing the poor man for cash. You need to talk to a professional therapist, Stella. We are arranging a prayer circle for you at the church on Sunday." I thanked her for her concern and ended the call. The isolation hit me with a physical weight. Brenda had poisoned the well. She leveraged her reputation as the devoted, grieving daughter to paint me as the unstable, greedy niece. If I stood up right now and shouted that they stole $100,000 from me, the entire extended family would shake their heads, offer a collective prayer, and whisper about my tragic mental decline. She built a flawless firewall. I called Marcus and relayed the details of the Whisper campaign. I expected him to be concerned. Instead, I heard a low, dark chuckle on the other end of the line. "She is running the textbook diversionary tactic." Marcus noted, his voice crisp and analytical. "She knows the ice is cracking under her feet, so she is trying to discredit the witness before the trial even begins. It is actually a very good sign, Stella. It means she is terrified." It does not feel good. I admitted watching my frozen breath in the cold kitchen air. My entire family thinks I am losing my mind. "Let them think it," Marcus instructed. "This is a gift. The most dangerous opponent is the one who thinks they have already won. We are finalizing the civil suit and coordinating the asset freeze with the bank. It will take a few more days to process the injunctions. During that time, I need you to play dead." Play dead. Validate her narrative, Marcus advised. Act defeated. Send messages apologizing for your behavior. Tell them you are exhausted and confused. Make them believe their psychological warfare broke you. The more complacent they become, the easier it will be to serve them. I ended the call with Marcus and sat in the quiet chill of my home. I opened my purse and pulled out the manila folder. I slid the color copy of the forged check onto the granite counter alongside the printed wire transfer logs showing the money bouncing from my ghost account into their failing business. The dramatic irony was a tangible force in the room. I held the irrefutable evidence of a federal crime in my bare hands while reading text messages from relatives urging me to seek psychiatric help. The anger that had sustained me for the past week refined itself into something much colder and sharper. I did not want to argue with them anymore. I wanted to execute them. I picked up my phone and opened the text thread with my mother. I crafted a response designed to feed every ounce of her narcissistic ego. "Mom, I am so tired," I typed, making sure to ignore basic punctuation to simulate fatigue. "My house is so cold. I think the stress is just getting to my head. I am sorry if I said things that did not make sense. I just do not know what to do anymore." I hit send. The response was instantaneous. Brenda had been waiting for my surrender. "Oh, my sweet girl," she replied, the digital text dripping with faux maternal warmth. "I knew you would come back to reality. We are family. We just want to help you." For 2 days, I maintained the facade. I sent slow, vague messages. I declined phone calls citing migraines and exhaustion. I let the silence stretch, ensuring they felt the full weight of their apparent victory. I allowed them to believe they had successfully crushed my spirit and buried their secret forever. By Saturday afternoon, the bait had been fully swallowed. My phone rang. The caller ID displayed Uncle Richard's name. I let it ring 3 times before answering, adopting a weak, hesitant tone. "Hello?" "Stella, sweetheart," Richard boomed. The aggressive, defensive edge from his previous calls was entirely gone. He sounded benevolent, expansive, and victorious. "Your mother told me you were having a rough week. We have all been so worried about you." "I am just really cold, Uncle Richard," I murmured, staring at the forged signature on the counter. "I do not know how to fix the furnace." "Well, that is exactly why I am calling," he declared, his voice swelling with patriarchal magnanimity. "We are not going to let you sit in that freezing house another night. We are hosting a family dinner tomorrow evening at the farmhouse. Just me, your aunt, your mother, and Bradley. We want you to come over. Have a hot meal. We are going to sit down as a family, figure out your debt situation, and get you back on your feet." It was a trap. He was inviting me to a classic family intervention. He intended to put me in a room surrounded by his loyalists to extract a verbal apology, force me to submit to his authority, and perhaps compel me to sign that indemnity waiver while I was supposedly vulnerable and broken. He thought he was luring a defeated girl into a cage to finish her off. He had no idea he was actually gathering every single target into one convenient location. "Thank you, Uncle Richard," I said, infusing my voice with quiet gratitude. "I will be there at 6. I hung up the phone. I called Marcus. I gave him the address, the date, and the exact time. The stage was set. The timeline was set. I had 48 hours until the Sunday evening intervention at the farmhouse. I spent Saturday morning sitting at my kitchen island, drinking hot tea, and reviewing the digital copies of the civil lawsuit Marcus had drafted. The pages were dense with allegations of fiduciary breach, grand theft, and wire fraud. It was a masterpiece of legal destruction. My phone vibrated against the granite countertop. Marcus was calling. I answered, expecting a routine update on the filing status. Instead, I heard the rhythmic tapping of a pen against a glass desk on his end of the line. It was the sound he made when a new variable entered the equation. I spent the morning running a final forensic sweep on the Thomas Family Ag Ventures operating account. Marcus began his tone devoid of pleasantries. I wanted to ensure we had the exact balance figures before the judge signed the asset freeze injunction on Monday. "Did they drain the rest of the funds?" I asked. I braced myself for the possibility that the remaining $70,000 had already vanished into the pockets of various corporate creditors. "No," Marcus replied. "The majority of the capital is still sitting in the primary business account, keeping their commercial credit lines out of default. But I found an anomaly in the outgoing transaction logs. A secondary wire transfer occurred less than 2 hours after your mother deposited the initial forged check." I pulled my laptop closer and opened the encrypted portal Marcus used to share documents. A new PDF file sat in the inbox. I clicked the icon and studied the digitized bank statement. "Look at line item 14, Marcus instructed. My eyes scanned down the rows of black text. The transaction timestamp read 11:42 on the morning of the theft. The originating account was the Ag Ventures LLC. The sum transferred was $30,000. "Where did this go?" I asked, tracing the routing sequence with my finger. "Did they pay off a supplier?" "I ran the receiving routing digits through an international banking database," Marcus explained. "That money did not go to a fertilizer vendor or a tractor mechanic. The destination is a private offshore holding account located in the Cayman Islands." I frowned, trying to reconcile the data with my knowledge of my family. Uncle Richard has never traveled outside the United States. He complains about the cost of long-distance phone calls. He would never navigate international tax havens. Richard did not initiate the transfer, Marcus said, the tapping of his pen ceasing. The authorization signature on the outgoing wire request belongs to Brenda. And the Cayman account is registered under a single name, hers. The implication hung in the cold air of my kitchen. I stared at the screen while the profound reality of the situation locked into place. My mother had not just forged my signature to save the family business. She had capitalized on the chaos of the theft to enrich herself in secret. She knew the business was a sinking ship. She knew Richard's pride would eventually drive the LLC into total bankruptcy, regardless of the stolen cash injection. So, she secured her own lifeboat. She siphoned nearly a third of my inheritance directly into an untraceable private account, leaving her brother holding the bag for a federal crime, while she built a hidden nest egg. The thieves were stealing from each other. "He does not know," I murmured, the realization bringing a sharp, cold clarity to my mind. "Richard thinks the business got a $100,000 lifeline. He thinks they are in this together. If he knew she skimmed $30,000 off the top to hide in the Caribbean, he would tear the farmhouse apart." "She is a textbook parasite," Marcus observed, his voice sharp and clinical. "She used your name to steal the money, and now she is using her brother's business as a shield to hide her own embezzlement. This is nuclear information, Stella. When we drop this specific bank record on the dining room table, the entire family alliance will shatter. They will turn on each other before the ink on the lawsuit even dries." "Do we have the sheriff confirmed?" I asked. My previous hesitation evaporated. The last lingering shred of familial obligation burned away, leaving nothing but tactical resolve. "The Polk County Civil Division is on standby," Marcus confirmed. "Serving a civil suit on a Sunday evening is highly unusual, but I leveraged the flight risk associated with the offshore account. I convinced the duty judge that if we wait until Monday morning, Brenda might catch wind of the audit and wire the rest of the funds overseas. The deputies will arrive at the farmhouse at exactly 6:30. That gives me 30 minutes alone with them, I calculated. "Let them talk," Marcus advised. "Let them dig the hole as deep as possible. Then you step back and let the badge do the talking." We ended the call. I closed the laptop. The legal trap was flawless, but I had one more loose end to tie. My cousin Bradley was currently driving a pristine white Ford F250, purchased with the proceeds of a felony. I refused to let him enjoy that vehicle for another 24 hours. I opened a new browser tab and utilized my logistics background to perform a targeted search. I knew the specific dealership in West Des Moines where he acquired the truck. I pulled up their corporate website and reviewed their primary automotive financing partners. It took me less than 10 minutes to cross-reference local lien records and identify the exact commercial lender holding the note on Bradley's new vehicle. I dialed the toll-free number for the lender's National Fraud and Risk Management Department. A representative answered, asking for my account number. "I do not have an account with your institution," I stated, keeping my voice calm and authoritative. "I am calling to report a fraudulent transaction regarding a recent vehicle purchase. You currently hold the title on a heavy-duty truck registered to Bradley Thomas in Polk County, Iowa. Ma'am, privacy regulations prevent me from discussing active automotive loans with unverified third parties," the representative recited, reading from a clear script. "I do not need you to discuss the loan with me," I countered smoothly. I need you to listen to me to protect your collateral. The $15,000 down payment your client provided last week was the direct proceed of a felony wire fraud. The funds were stolen from an estate trust. The primary business accounts associated with the buyer are scheduled to be frozen by a federal judge on Monday morning under civil docket number 4820. The representative went silent. Banks hate risk. Automotive lenders despise risk even more. I am providing this information so your recovery division can act before the asset is hidden or damaged. I continued delivering the final blow. The buyer is insolvent. The down payment is illicit. The vehicle is currently parked at a property on County Road 9. I suggest you dispatch a recovery unit immediately. I hung up the phone. I had just initiated a cascade of events that no one in my family could stop. Sunday afternoon arrived, casting long gray shadows across the snow. The intervention was scheduled for 6. I walked into my bedroom and opened my closet. For the past 2 weeks, I had worn heavy winter coats, thick wool sweaters, and layers of fleece just to survive the freezing temperatures inside my own home. I had played the part of the broken, shivering victim perfectly. I reached past the heavy winter gear and pulled out a tailored charcoal blazer. I selected a crisp white blouse and dark pressed trousers. I dressed methodically, snapping buttons and adjusting cuffs with precise, deliberate movements. I stood in front of the mirror and brushed my hair back, securing it tightly. I looked at my reflection. There was no trace of the exhausted, confused girl who had texted Brenda begging for help. The woman staring back at me was a predator stepping into her own domain. I picked up my purse, ensuring the high-resolution copies of the forged check and the offshore wire transfer were secured in the side pocket. I grabbed my keys, walked out the front door, and locked it behind me. I was ready to walk into the lion's den. The drive to the farmhouse took 22 minutes. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a bruised purple sky and a biting chill that seeped through the floorboards of my car. I turned onto the familiar gravel driveway. The headlights swept across the stark white siding of the old house. Parked directly in front of the porch steps, occupying the prime space, was Bradley's pristine Ford F250. The chrome bumpers caught the light, gleaming with the arrogance of stolen money. I parked my Honda a few yards away, turned off the ignition, and took one final steadying breath. I stepped out into the freezing air. My tailored charcoal blazer provided very little insulation against the Midwestern winter, but I did not care. I walked up the wooden steps, my boots echoing loudly in the quiet night. Before I could even raise my hand to knock, the heavy oak door swung open. My mother stood in the threshold. She wore a woven cardigan over a floral blouse, projecting the ultimate image of maternal concern. The smell of roasted beef carrots and caramelized onions wafted out from the kitchen behind her. It was a suffocating wave of manufactured domestic comfort designed to disarm me the second I crossed the boundary into their territory. "Stella, sweetheart, you made it," Brenda cooed. She reached out, enveloping me in a tight embrace. Her perfume smelled like lavender and expensive powder. I endured the hug, keeping my arms strictly at my sides. "Come inside, out of the cold," she urged, ushering me into the foyer. "We have a fire going in the dining room. Everyone is waiting." I stepped out of my boots and walked down the hallway. The dining room was bathed in the warm amber glow of the hearth. The antique mahogany table was set with the fine wedding china. Crystal water goblets caught the flickering firelight. Uncle Richard sat at the head of the table. He wore a crisp button-down shirt, his posture relaxed and expansive. He looked every inch the benevolent patriarch, ready to dispense wisdom to a wayward relative. Bradley leaned back in a chair near the corner of the room, nursing a dark, stout beer. He offered a lazy, mocking salute with the bottle as I entered. "Have a seat, Stella," Richard offered, gesturing to the empty chair directly to his right. It was a tactical placement, putting me within arm's reach, keeping me physically subordinate to his position at the head of the board. I sat down. I placed my purse on the floor right next to my chair, ensuring it remained within easy grasp. "We are so glad you decided to join us." Richard began folding his hands over his empty dinner plate. "Your mother has been worried sick about you. We all have. Living in that freezing townhouse, dealing with all that crushing credit card debt, it takes a toll on a person's mind." He was establishing the narrative immediately. He needed to frame the entire conversation around my supposed mental instability. If he controlled the premise, he controlled the outcome. "It has been a difficult week," I replied, keeping my voice soft and deliberately flat. I offered them nothing to push back against. Brenda took the seat across from me. She reached out and patted my hand, her eyes brimming with calculated sympathy. "We know you have not been thinking clearly, Stella. Grief does terrible things to a family, and financial stress can make a person imagine all sorts of crazy scenarios. We forgive you for the things you said. We know it was the exhaustion talking." "Exactly," Richard chimed in, his tone dripping with patronizing authority. "Families stick together through mental health struggles. We do not hold grudges when someone loses their way. We extend a helping hand. That is what your grandfather would have wanted." I looked at the man sitting at the head of the table. He was invoking the memory of the grandfather he had just robbed. The sheer, profound audacity required to steal $100,000 and then use the deceased victim's legacy as a rhetorical weapon was staggering. Bradley snorted, taking another sip of his beer. "You just need to learn how to manage your finances better, Stella. Maybe skip the expensive coffees and pay your heating bill." The hypocrisy hung heavy in the warm room. The unemployed landscaper driving a luxury truck purchased with my inheritance was lecturing me on fiscal responsibility. I did not glare at him. I simply absorbed the comment, filing it away. Richard cleared his throat, signaling the end of the warm-up phase. The main event was starting. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a crisp white envelope. He laid it flat on the mahogany table. Next to the envelope, he placed a single sheet of printer paper and a silver pen. I spoke with the bank manager again. Richard lied his face, a mask of solemn duty. "The probate liquidity hold is still active, and the audit might take several more months, but I cannot let my niece freeze." I dipped into my own personal savings. "I am fronting you some cash to fix your furnace and pay off whatever debts are clouding your judgment." He used his index finger to slide the envelope toward me. "There is a cashier check in there for $5,000, Richard stated. I looked down at the envelope. $5,000. They had stolen $100,000. My mother had skimmed $30,000 of that to hide in the Caribbean. They bought an $85,000 vehicle. Now they were offering me a 5% return on my own stolen money and framing it as an act of profound Christian charity. "Thank you, Uncle Richard," I murmured. Of course he smiled, settling back into his chair. "There is just one minor formality. I need you to sign that receipt right there. It just states that you received an advance from the executor and that you agree to stop contacting the legal and financial institutions regarding the trust until the formal dispersal period concludes. It protects us both." I did not need to pick up the paper to know what it said. I recognized the formatting from the 20-page document he tried to force on me at the coffee shop. It was another indemnity waiver, a legally binding gag order. They brought me here, isolated me in the farmhouse, surrounded me with their overwhelming false warmth, and expected me to sign away my rights for a fraction of what I was owed. They expected the broken, shivering girl to eagerly accept the scraps. They did not notice the tailored blazer. They did not register the absence of trembling in my hands. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, they failed to realize they were sitting in a room with a predator. I reached out and placed my fingertips on the edge of the envelope. I did not pull it toward me. I simply held it in place. I turned my wrist slightly, glancing at the face of my watch. The digital display read 6:29. I looked up. I met my mother's gaze. The faux sympathy in her eyes faltered slightly under the weight of my cold, unblinking stare. I shifted my focus to Richard. His triumphant smile wavered. The atmosphere in the dining room shifted, the fabricated warmth instantly replaced by a sudden, chilling tension. I did not argue with his fabricated narrative. I did not scream about the theft. I kept my voice perfectly level, carrying the quiet authority of a finalized audit. "I will not be needing this," I said, pushing the envelope and the unsigned waiver back across the polished mahogany. Richard frowned, a flash of genuine anger breaking through the paternal facade. "Stella, do not be stubborn. You are out of options. Sign the paper." "I am not out of options," I replied, picking up my purse from the floor and setting it onto my lap. "But you are going to need a lawyer." Bradley laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "A lawyer? With what money, Stella? You cannot even afford a space heater." I ignored my cousin, keeping my eyes locked on the patriarch at the head of the table. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, counting down the final seconds of their false reality. Heavy, authoritative footsteps crunched onto the snowy wooden planks of the front porch outside. The conversation in the dining room died instantly. Brenda turned her head toward the foyer, her brow furrowing in confusion. Richard sat up straight, gripping the armrests of his chair. The heavy brass doorbell rang, echoing through the quiet farmhouse. The brass chime of the doorbell echoed through the quiet farmhouse. It was a sharp, jarring sound that severed the tense silence hovering over the dining table. Bradley groaned, setting his dark, stout beer down on the polished mahogany. He muttered a complaint under his breath about local salesmen, ignoring the warning signs posted at the end of the gravel driveway. He pushed his chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He sauntered toward the foyer, his posture radiating entitled annoyance. Richard kept his eyes fixed on me. His jaw muscles worked beneath his skin. He was irritated by the interruption. He had orchestrated this entire evening to force my submission, and the ringing doorbell broke his carefully calculated rhythm. Brenda stood up from her chair, wiping her hands on a linen napkin. Her brow furrowed. She looked toward the hallway, her maternal facade slipping just a fraction to reveal genuine confusion. Nobody visited the rural farmhouse on a Sunday night without calling ahead. I heard the heavy oak door open. I listened to the shift in the ambient noise. There was no casual greeting. There was no exchange of polite Midwestern pleasantries. Instead, a deep, resonant baritone voice spoke a single sentence. A burst of police radio static crackled, cutting through the smell of roasted beef and caramelized onions. Heavy tactical boots stepped onto the pristine hardwood. The sound was measured and authoritative. Bradley backed into the dining room. His face was entirely devoid of color. The arrogant smirk he had worn all evening vanished, wiped away by the reality stepping through the threshold. A uniformed Polk County deputy sheriff followed Bradley into the amber glow of the dining room. He was a tall, imposing figure, wearing a dark, tactical uniform. A heavy utility belt sat at his waist, laden with equipment. The silver star pinned to his chest caught the flickering light of the hearth fire. His presence instantly drained the fabricated warmth from the room, replacing it with the cold, sterile reality of the legal system. Richard stood up. He smoothed the front of his crisp button-down shirt, attempting to project the image of a respectable local businessman. He was a man who waved at police officers during summer parades and bought coffee for the local precinct. He was not a man who expected law enforcement to interrupt his private family dinner. Officer Richard said, his voice thick with forced geniality. "Is there a problem here? We are in the middle of a private family meal." The deputy did not smile. He did not remove his hat. He held 2 thick manila envelopes in his left hand. The envelopes were packed tight, bound by thick industrial rubber bands. "I am looking for Richard Thomas and Brenda Thomas," the deputy stated, his gaze sweeping across the table. "I am Richard Thomas," my uncle replied, his forced smile faltering. "This is my sister, Brenda. What is the meaning of this intrusion?" The deputy stepped forward. He extended his arm and placed one thick envelope directly onto the mahogany table right next to Richard's pristine dinner plate. He handed the second envelope to Brenda. She took it reflexively, her fingers trembling against the heavy paper. "You have been served," the deputy announced, his tone carrying the bored finality of a man performing a routine daily task. "Have a good evening." The deputy turned on his heel and walked out. The heavy tactical boots receded down the hallway. The front door pulled shut with a solid, definitive thud. Outside, the crunch of the patrol car tires on the frozen gravel drifted through the window glass, fading into the winter night. The dining room fell into a suffocating silence. The only sound was the crackle of the burning logs in the fireplace and the ticking of the grandfather clock. The smell of the rich food suddenly felt heavy and sickening in the stagnant air. Richard stared at the thick manila envelope resting on his dining table. The color returned to his face, rushing up his neck in a deep, angry flush. He looked at the sealed flap, then shifted his glare toward me. The benevolent patriarch routine shattered. "What is this, Stella?" he demanded, his voice rising into a sharp bark. "What kind of stunt are you pulling here? Did you call the police to your own grandfather's house?" I did not shrink from his anger. I reached down and picked up my purse. I stood up from the antique chair, smoothing the front of my charcoal blazer. The physical act of standing shifted the power dynamic in the room. I was no longer the freezing, desperate niece trapped at the bottom of the hierarchy. I was the architect of their ruin. "I did not call the police, Uncle Richard," I said, my voice icy and precise. "I call the process server. You are looking at a formal civil complaint filed in the District Court of Polk County." Brenda clutched her envelope to her chest, her eyes darting frantically toward the front window. Bradley remained frozen near the doorway, his hands empty, his beer forgotten on the counter. "You are being sued," I continued, enunciating every syllable with crisp, deliberate clarity. "The charges include civil theft, fraud, and a gross breach of fiduciary duty regarding the handling of my inheritance." Richard let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. He slapped his hand against the table, rattling the crystal water goblets. "You are suing me? You have lost your mind. You have no money to hire a lawyer, Stella. You do not even have the funds to fix your own heater. Any judge will throw this frivolous garbage out of court the second they see your credit report." "My credit report is immaculate," I corrected him, "and you vastly underestimate my resources. But you should be far more concerned about your own financial standing. At 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, a federal judge will sign an injunction freezing every commercial operating account tied to Thomas Family Ag Ventures. The lines of credit are suspended. The vendor payments will bounce. You are officially insolvent." The blood drained from Richard's face. The bluster evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp panic. He built his entire identity around the success of that agricultural supply company. The threat of frozen assets struck the deepest nerve he possessed. "You cannot do that," he stammered, his hands hovering over the envelope. "You have no proof of anything. The estate funds are locked in a compliance audit. I showed you the emails." "Open the envelope, Richard," I instructed. He grabbed the manila package. His hands were shaking. He tore at the sealed flap, ripping the heavy paper in his haste. He pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. The front page of the complaint was printed on heavy bond paper, but it was not a list of legal statutes or court summons. The very first page was the high-resolution color photocopy of the canceled bank draft. The check for $100,000. The security screen and the typed memo line were crisp and unmistakable. But the page was printed showing the reverse side of the document. The endorsement line faced upward. Richard stared at the paper. His eyes tracked the dark blue ink resting on the endorsement line. He read the printed name. Then he looked closer. He saw the distinct, sweeping loop of the capital letter. He recognized the exact proportions, the deliberate pressure of the pen, the elegant curl connecting to the lowercase letters. It was the identical script resting on the beautifully calligraphed place cards scattered across his own dining table. As a supply chain analyst, I spend my days monitoring systems for points of failure. I look for the exact moment a structural weakness compromises the entire network. Watching Uncle Richard hold that piece of paper, I witnessed a real-time systemic collapse. The illusion of family loyalty, the fabricated narratives of grief, the arrogant posturing, everything crumbled under the weight of empirical data. The air left his lungs in a sharp, ragged exhale. Richard looked up from the paper and slowly turned his head toward his sister. He realized he was not looking at a clerical banking error or a simple civil dispute. He was looking at concrete, documented evidence of a federal crime committed by the woman standing right next to him. The invisible walls of the trap I had built over the past 5 days finally slammed shut. The paper slipped from Richard's fingers and fluttered onto the polished mahogany surface. He stared at his sister. The carefully constructed hierarchy of the Thomas family dissolved in that single glance. Richard did not look at Brenda with the righteous indignation of a man discovering a crime. He looked at her with the furious terror of a co-conspirator realizing his partner had made a fatal, unforced error. "You used your own handwriting." Richard whispered the words carrying a sharp, ragged edge. "I told you to handle the deposit. I told you to make it clean. How could you be so stupid as to leave a direct paper trail?" Brenda took a step back, her shoulders hitting the edge of the antique china cabinet. The refined maternal facade she had perfected over 4 decades shattered. Her face twisted into a mask of cornered panic. "I had to sign it in person," she shot back, her voice shrill and defensive. "The teller required identification for a joint custodial account. I could not just drop it in a night deposit box, Richard. We needed the cash injection that same day to stop the bank from seizing the commercial warehouse. You were the one who drove the business into the ground. I was trying to save your legacy." "You forged my niece's signature," Richard yelled, his fists clenching at his sides. "You committed a felony in broad daylight. You brought a federal investigation right to my doorstep." "Do not act like you are innocent," Brenda shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at him. "You drafted that fake compliance email. You tried to force her to sign that liability waiver. We agreed we would hold the money in the LLC operating account until the spring planting season brought in revenue. We were going to pay her back." They were confessing out loud in front of a witness. The illusion of family loyalty evaporated, replaced by the primitive instinct of self-preservation. They were turning on each other, throwing their shared history into the fire to shield themselves from the incoming blaze. I stood near my chair watching the implosion. A logistics analyst knows that a system built on corrupt data will eventually collapse under its own weight. I was watching the structural failure in real time, but they still believed they understood the full scope of the disaster. Richard still believed his sister had committed this crime entirely for his benefit. I reached into my leather purse. My fingers brushed past my car keys and found the secondary, folded document I had printed that morning. I pulled it out and smoothed the crease. "She did not just save the warehouse, Uncle Richard," I said. My voice cut through their screaming match. Richard stopped mid-sentence, his chest heaving. Brenda froze, her eyes darting toward the paper in my hand. I stepped forward and placed the secondary bank statement right on top of the forged check. "You should look at the outgoing transaction logs for the Ag Ventures operating account," I instructed, tapping the specific line item with my index finger. "The money hit your business ledger at 9:28 in the morning, but it did not stay there." Richard leaned over the table. He squinted at the dense rows of alphanumeric codes and withdrawal sums. "Read line item 14, I prompted. He traced the row. He saw the timestamp reading 11:42. He saw the withdrawal amount of $30,000. He saw the destination routing sequence indicating an offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands. "What is this?" Richard demanded, his voice dropping back to a dangerous whisper. He looked up at Brenda. "Did you authorize a vendor payment without clearing it through my office?" Brenda pressed her lips together tightly. She refused to meet his eye. Her silence was a localized vacuum pulling all the oxygen out of the dining room. "That routing number does not belong to a vendor." I clarified, stepping back to observe the final detonation. "That is a private international account registered exclusively under her name. She did not forge my signature just to bail out your failing company. She knew your business was doomed, regardless of the stolen cash. She used my inheritance to pay off your immediate creditors, so you would not ask questions, while she skimmed 30 grand off the top to build her own hidden nest egg." Richard stood perfectly still. The betrayal hit him with the force of a physical impact. His sister had not just stolen from their niece, she had stolen from him. She used his failing company as a money laundering shield, exposing him to federal wire fraud charges, while she secured a Caribbean lifeboat for herself. "You stole from the business," Richard breathed the words, barely audible. "I deserve security," Brenda cried out, tears finally spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. But they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of a trapped narcissist. "I spent my entire life cleaning up your messes, Gordon. Every time you made a bad investment, I had to smooth things over with the bank. I took that money because you were going to lose it all anyway." "I will kill you," Richard roared, lunging around the edge of the mahogany table. Bradley shouted and stepped forward, grabbing his father's arm to hold him back. The dining room devolved into pure, unadulterated chaos. The patriarch was screaming threats. The matriarch was sobbing and hurling decades of buried resentments. The golden child was struggling to keep the two older siblings from physically tearing each other apart. I did not intervene. I stood in the amber glow of the hearth fire, listening to the destruction of my own family. Then a new element entered the scene. A rhythmic, sweeping flash of bright yellow light cut through the darkness outside. The intense amber strobe penetrated the front windows of the farmhouse, illuminating the crystal water goblets and casting harsh, moving shadows against the dining room walls. The screaming inside the house faltered. Bradley let go of his father's arm and turned toward the window. The heavy, deep rumble of a commercial diesel engine vibrated through the floorboards. It was a rougher, industrial sound, distinct from the smooth idle of Bradley's new truck. The sharp hiss of pneumatic air brakes echoed across the snowy yard. Bradley rushed to the window and pushed the curtains aside. His face pressed against the cold glass. "Hey," Bradley yelled, his voice cracking with sudden frantic panic. "Hey, stop!" He abandoned his parents, leaving them standing over the evidence of their felonies. He sprinted down the hallway, his boots slipping on the hardwood. He threw the heavy oak front door open and charged out into the freezing winter night. I walked calmly toward the foyer and stood in the open doorway. The frigid air washed over my face, bringing a sharp, clean clarity to the moment. A heavy-duty repossession tow truck was backing slowly down the gravel driveway. The yellow strobe lights spun in relentless circles, painting the snow in flashes of amber. The operator had already maneuvered the steel stinger arm beneath the front axle of the pristine white Ford F250. "Put the truck down," Bradley screamed, sprinting across the yard without a coat, his breath pluming in massive white clouds. "You cannot take that. I put 15 grand down on that vehicle." The repo operator stepped out of the cab wearing a thick canvas jacket and holding a clipboard. He did not look intimidated. He looked at Bradley with the tired patience of a man who dealt with screaming debtors every night of the week. The lender revoked the financing contract. "Sir," the operator stated, his voice carrying over the idle of his engine. "The fraud division flagged the origin of your down payment. The title is nullified. Step away from the vehicle, or I will call the county dispatcher." "It is my truck," Bradley shouted, grabbing the frozen chrome of the side mirror. "It is bank property," the operator corrected, hitting a lever on the side of his rig. The hydraulic winch whined in the cold air. The front tires of the $85,000 truck lifted off the frozen gravel. The suspension groaned as the vehicle was hoisted into the air, tilting backward at a sharp angle. Bradley stood in the snow, his hands falling to his sides, watching the ultimate symbol of his fabricated success get dragged away into the dark. Inside the farmhouse, Richard and Brenda were still shouting, their voices echoing down the hallway, a bitter soundtrack to the mechanical hum of the tow winch. The family loyalty was gone. The money was frozen. The truck was repossessed. The illusion of Midwestern prosperity was dismantled, right down to the studs. I did not need to say goodbye. I did not need to extract a verbal apology from any of them. The paper trail had done the talking, and the legal system was executing the sentence. I stepped out onto the porch, pulling my blazer tight against the wind. I walked down the wooden stairs and crunched across the gravel toward my own car. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and turned the ignition. The engine sputtered to life. I shifted into gear and drove down the driveway, passing the repo truck as it hauled its heavy prize toward the main road. I left my family standing in the ruins of their own making. The intervention was over. But as I merged onto the dark, icy highway heading back toward Des Moines, I knew the true execution was still pending. The legal battle was just beginning, and I was holding all the leverage. 14 days passed since the sheriff walked into the farmhouse dining room. The brutal Midwestern winter broke just enough to turn the accumulated snow into gray slush along the city's streets. I walked into the industrial law offices of Marcus Thorne on the Tuesday morning wearing my sharpest tailored suit. The polished concrete floors clicked beneath my heels. I felt a profound sense of calm settling over my shoulders. The frantic, shivering anxiety of the past 6 months was gone. I was no longer the victim freezing in a broken townhouse. I was the auditor arriving to close the ledger. Opposing counsel had requested this meeting. They begged for it. Marcus led me into the glass-walled conference room. We took our seats on one side of the transparent table. 5 minutes later, the heavy door opened. My Uncle Richard and my mother walked in, followed closely by a tired-looking defense attorney. The physical toll of the past 2 weeks was written plainly across their faces. Richard looked like he had aged a decade. His crisp button-down shirts were gone, replaced by a rumpled suit jacket that hung loose on his frame. His posture was stooped, the arrogant patriarch facade entirely dismantled by the freezing of his commercial assets. Brenda looked even worse. She wore no makeup. The pristine maternal styling she spent her life perfecting had dissolved. Her eyes were sunken, ringed with dark circles born of sleepless nights. She kept her arms wrapped tightly around her torso, shivering despite the warm air circulating through the modern office. She chose a chair at the far end of the table, maintaining a distinct physical distance from her brother. The alliance was dead. Their defense attorney opened his briefcase. He was a man who clearly understood he held a losing hand. He avoided meeting Marcus in the eye. "Thank you for agreeing to sit down with us," the defense attorney began, his voice projecting a forced, professional diplomacy. "My clients acknowledge that grave errors in judgment occurred regarding the handling of the estate trust. We are here today to make the beneficiary whole. We want to avoid protracted litigation and keep this a private family matter." The lawyer reached into his folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the glass table. "We are prepared to offer a full restitution settlement," the attorney stated. "My clients will return the initial principal of $100,000. We propose a structured repayment plan over a 12-month period, utilizing liquidated personal assets. We will also include a standard 5% interest yield to account for the delay." I looked at the printed proposal. I did not touch the paper. They were delusional. They sat in a high-rise law firm facing documented felony fraud, and they believed they could still negotiate from a position of authority. They thought returning the stolen money on a payment plan would magically erase the crime. I looked across the table at my mother. She stared intensely at her own hands resting in her lap. Her fingers trembled. She refused to make eye contact with me. I shifted my gaze to Richard. He tried to muster a stern expression, but the raw panic bleeding through his eyes betrayed him. "I audit vendor contracts for a living," I said. My voice was calm, filling the quiet room with a chilling certainty. When a supplier breaches a contract or falsifies a shipping manifest, they do not simply return the stolen goods and ask for forgiveness. They pay punitive damages. They pay penalties. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. "Stella, your family is offering a guaranteed path to restitution. If you pursue a trial, the legal fees will consume any potential victory." I ignored the lawyer. I kept my eyes locked on my uncle. "We are not operating under the rules of a standard contract dispute." I explained, breaking down the mathematics of their ruin. "You committed grand theft. Under Iowa state statutes, civil theft triggers treble damages. The law is designed to punish perpetrators who act with deliberate intent. The court will multiply the stolen principal by 3. Richard swallowed hard. his Adam's apple bobbing against his collar. The base penalty is $300,000. I continued counting the figures off with precise mechanical logic, plus the original $100,000 you stole, plus the billable hours for Marcus Thorne and his investigative team. You do not owe me a repayment plan. You owe me $450,000, payable immediately. We do not have it, Richard blurted out, his voice cracking under the pressure. You know we do not have it, Stella. You froze the Ag Ventures operating accounts. The business is dead. The suppliers are circling like vultures. Bradley had to file for unemployment yesterday morning. Brenda let out a quiet, ragged sob, burying her face in her hands. And the Cayman holding account? Marcus interjected, his voice cutting like a scalpel.
The international banking authorities seized those assets on Friday after we flagged the wire transfer. You have no liquid capital remaining. You are insolvent.
Then you understand why your demand is impossible, the defense attorney argued, attempting to regain control of the negotiation. You cannot squeeze blood from a stone. If you demand $500,000, my clients will be forced to declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy. You will end up in a crowded line of unsecured creditors, and you will walk away with nothing. They were banking on the bankruptcy shield. They thought hiding behind a court-appointed liquidator would protect them from the consequences of their actions. Marcus leaned forward, resting his forearms on the glass table. He smiled a thin, humorless expression that made the defense attorney flinch. Bankruptcy protections do not discharge debts resulting from felony fraud or embezzlement, Marcus corrected, citing the federal bankruptcy code with lethal precision. If you file for Chapter 7, this specific debt survives the liquidation. It will follow your clients for the rest of their natural lives. We will garnish their Social Security checks. We will place liens on their vehicles. The silence in the conference room grew heavy, suffocating the last remaining hopes of the two siblings. They were cornered. However, Marcus continued his tone, shifting into the smooth cadence of a predator closing the trap. My client is willing to offer an alternative settlement, a path that keeps your clients out of a federal penitentiary. Marcus opened a thick manila envelope resting beside his laptop. He extracted a legal document printed on heavy blue bonded paper. A gold notary seal waited empty at the bottom of the final page. He slid the document across the transparent table until it rested directly in front of Richard. This is a quitclaim deed transfer, Marcus announced. Richard looked down at the document. He read the bold header text. His eyes widened as he scanned the property coordinates listed in the first paragraph. It details the immediate transfer of real property, Marcus explained, specifically a 40-acre parcel of the Thomas family farm, the land your father left to you in the primary estate dispersal. My client will accept the deed to this specific parcel in full satisfaction of the $450,000 civil debt. No, Richard gasped, recoiling from the paper as if it were burning hot. You cannot take the land. That is my birthright. That acreage has been in our family for 3 generations. It is worth far more than the settlement demand. It is the only asset you possess that holds verified, unencumbered equity, Marcus countered. I will not sign it, Richard declared, slamming his fist against the table. I will fight you in court. I will take my chances with a jury. I watched my uncle cling to his fractured pride. He was still trying to dictate the terms of his own surrender. He still did not grasp the true severity of the leverage we held. This is not a negotiation, Richard Marcus stated, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. If you do not sign that deed today, this civil settlement offer expires. I will press a single button on my keyboard. I will transmit the forged check, the fake banking emails, and the offshore wire transfer logs directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Field Office in Omaha. You will be indicted for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and elder financial abuse. Marcus let the threat hang in the air, ensuring every syllable processed in their minds. The mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines for those offenses will ensure you and your sister spend the next decade in a federal prison cell, Marcus finished. You have a choice. You can surrender a plot of dirt, or you can surrender your freedom. Choose right now. The defense attorney turned to Richard. He nodded, his face grim and defeated. He knew Marcus was not bluffing. The evidence was irrefutable. A trial would be a slaughter. Richard stared at the deed transfer. His hands shook as he reached for the silver pen resting on the table. He looked at the property coordinates again. A profound confusion fought through his terror. He looked up at me. "Why this specific parcel?" Richard asked, his voice a hollow whisper. "It sits right off Interstate 80. It is mostly gravel and industrial zoning. The soil is terrible for farming. Why do you want this exact patch of dirt?" "Stella," I looked at the man who had mocked me while I froze in my own home. I looked at the mother who had sold my future to buy herself a Caribbean vacation. "I am a logistics analyst," I replied, my voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of a finalized audit. "I studied the property surveys. I did not choose that parcel for the soil quality, Uncle Richard. The dirt is entirely worthless to me. I chose it because of the structures currently anchored to it." I looked across the transparent glass of the conference table. My uncle sat frozen, his pen hovering over the thick blue bonded paper. He still could not grasp the architectural precision of the trap. He viewed the family farm as a single, indivisible entity, a legacy passed down through generations. But as a supply chain analyst, I do not see legacy. I see acreage, zoning boundaries, and commercial utility. I pulled the municipal property surveys from the county planning office. I told him, my voice echoing in the quiet room. I cross-referenced the original deed lines with the current commercial zoning permits. You built Thomas Family Ag Ventures right alongside Interstate 80 to optimize your freight routes. It was a smart logistical move, but you did not build it on your own commercial plot. You constructed the primary facility on the northern edge of the agricultural estate to avoid corporate property taxes. Richard stared at me, his jaw slack. The realization began to dawn behind his eyes, a slow, creeping horror replacing the confusion. Those 40 acres do not just hold gravel and bad soil, Uncle Richard. I continued mapping the reality out for him. That specific parcel holds the concrete foundation of your primary distribution warehouse. It holds the steel loading docks where Bradley used to work. It holds the front office, the employee parking lot, and the security gates. The entire physical footprint of your business sits directly on top of the land you are about to sign over to me. The defense attorney closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. He understood the legal implications instantly. "If I sign this," Richard whispered, his voice cracking, "you own the building. You own the land under the building." "I become your commercial landlord," I confirmed. "You stole $100,000 from your own niece to save a dying company. In exchange, you are going to hand me the keys to the kingdom." "I will not do it," he gasped, dropping the silver pen onto the table. It clattered against the glass, a sharp, hollow sound. "I will not let you take my business." "The business is already gone," Marcus intervened, his tone lacking any trace of sympathy. "Your accounts are frozen. Your credit is nullified. If you refuse to sign, you will go to federal prison, and the bank will foreclose on the warehouse anyway. The only difference is whether you sleep in your own bed tonight or in a holding cell in Omaha. Pick up the pen, Richard." Richard looked at his sister. Brenda sat at the far end of the table staring blankly at the polished concrete floor. She offered no defense, no brilliant manipulation, no tears of rescue. She had secured her offshore account and lost it all in the same breath. She was empty. With a trembling hand, Richard picked up the silver pen. He pressed the tip to the signature line on the final page of the quitclaim deed. He signed his name, the ink scratching loudly in the silent room. He pushed the document toward his sister. Brenda did not hesitate. She gripped the pen and signed her name, her pristine calligraphy reduced to a jagged, rushed scrawl. The defense attorney brought over the firm notary. She reviewed their identification, stamped the heavy blue paper with a gold-embossed seal, and signed her own name. The heavy metallic thud of the notary stamp finalizing the document was the loudest sound I had heard in 6 months. Marcus collected the deed and slipped it into his briefcase. He then produced a secondary file, sliding it across the table. "This is a standard commercial triple net lease agreement," Marcus announced. Effective immediately, Thomas Family Ag Ventures is a tenant on the property owned by my client. The monthly rent is set at current market value. Rent is due on the first calendar day of every month. There is no grace period. There are no family discounts. If you miss a single payment by so much as 1 hour, my client will initiate immediate eviction proceedings, lock the gates, and liquidate any remaining assets left inside the structure. They did not argue. They took the lease agreement, stood up from the table, and walked out of the conference room. They moved like ghosts, hollow and defeated, stripped of the arrogant pride that had defined our family for decades. I sat in the leather chair watching the heavy oak door swing shut behind them. I did not feel the need to cheer or celebrate. I simply felt the profound, quiet satisfaction of a ledger balancing perfectly to zero. The winter thawed, turning the frozen Iowa fields into dark, rich mud. Spring arrived, bringing a bitter, relentless reality to my uncle and my mother. Without the stolen capital and burdened by the crushing weight of the new commercial rent, Thomas Family Ag Ventures suffocated within 90 days. They could not secure new inventory. They could not pay their freight tariffs. On the first day of May, the rent check did not arrive. I did not call them to ask for an explanation. I did not send a text message seeking a polite compromise. I called Marcus. He filed the eviction notice that same afternoon. The county sheriff arrived at the warehouse, placed a heavy iron padlock on the main gates, and taped a bright yellow legal notice to the front glass door. The business was dead. The family hierarchy was permanently fractured. Richard and Brenda stopped speaking to each other entirely. Bradley moved out of the state, seeking work in a different county, far away from the humiliation of his repossessed truck. I did not keep the 40 acres. I had no interest in managing an empty metal warehouse or holding on to a piece of dirt tainted by their memory. Instead, I utilized my professional network. I contacted a national logistics conglomerate looking to expand their Midwestern freight routes. They needed a facility positioned precisely adjacent to Interstate 80. I sold the land and the structures to the commercial developer 3 months later. The buyout was incredibly lucrative, far exceeding the appraised value of the acreage. I used the proceeds to clear the $30,000 high-interest personal loan I took out to hire Marcus. I paid his firm every cent of their billable hours. I deposited the remaining surplus into a secure, high-yield investment account, securing my financial independence for the rest of my life. On a quiet Tuesday evening in November, the first true cold snap of the new season descended upon Des Moines. The wind howled against the windows of my townhouse, rattling the glass and threatening to push the freezing air through the weather stripping. I stood in my living room, holding a mug of hot tea. I looked at the wall in the hallway. The old broken thermostat was gone. In its place sat a sleek, modern digital interface glowing with a soft blue backlight. The digital numbers read a steady, comfortable 72 degrees. I listened closely. Beneath the sound of the howling wind outside, I heard a deep, powerful, mechanical hum. It was the roar of a brand-new, top-of-the-line, high-efficiency HVAC unit igniting in the basement. A few seconds later, a wave of intense, beautiful heat pushed through the floor vents, washing over my feet and filling the room with an uncompromising warmth. I closed my eyes and let the heat wrap around me. I remembered sitting in this exact spot, wrapped in a winter coat, shivering, while my uncle lied to me over the phone. I remembered my mother telling me to put on a sweater, while she hid $30,000 in a Caribbean bank. They tried to leave me in the cold. Instead, they bought my fire. If you are listening to this right now and you are sitting in a room where people demand your silence to maintain their comfort, pay attention to the paperwork. Toxic people rely on your compliance. They build their empires on your willingness to look the other way, to forgive the unpaid debts, and to accept their emotional manipulation as love. You do not owe them your warmth. You do not owe them your sanity. When a family shows you exactly who they are and what they are willing to steal from you, stop arguing with them. Stop begging for the respect they will never freely give. Audit their lies. Find the leverage. Let them dig their own graves with their arrogance and their pride. You cannot love a toxic family into respecting you. but you can buy the ground they stand on and let the deed do the talking. The steady mechanical hum of a furnace turning on is a remarkably simple sound. Yet in the aftermath of Stella's story, it resonates as something much deeper. It is the sound of hard-won security, a boundary drawn in steel, and the ultimate triumph over a profound betrayal. We leave Stella to her warmth, financially secure, and finally free from the suffocating grip of her relatives. But long after the legal documents are filed and the dust settles over the empty commercial warehouse, the echoes of that rural Iowa farmhouse linger in the mind. When we peel back the layers of fraud, the fake bank emails, and the offshore accounts, we are not just looking at a story about stolen money. We are looking at a catastrophic failure of family responsibility. We are witnessing the tragic collapse of parenting values within a traditional American structure, a structure that too often conflates the appearance of success with the presence of character. In American culture, there is a deep, almost mythological reverence for the concept of the family legacy. We idealize the multi-generational farm, the family-owned business, the Sunday dinners around a mahogany table. We are taught to protect the family name at all costs. But what happens when the name becomes more important than the people who bear it? Richard and Brenda were so desperate to maintain the illusion of Midwestern prosperity that they sacrificed the very foundation a family requires to survive: honesty. Consider the dynamic between the two younger cousins, Stella and Bradley. They represent the two divergent paths of modern parenting. Bradley is the quintessential product of a household that values status over substance. Richard and Brenda believed they were protecting him by shielding him from the reality of their failing business. By utilizing stolen funds to buy him an expensive truck, they likely told themselves they were providing for their boy, giving him a leg up in the world. But true family responsibility is not about building a glass pedestal for your children. It is about teaching them how to walk on rough ground. By removing the consequences of his lack of ambition, his parents crippled him. They taught him that entitlement supersedes ethics and that the rules of fairness do not apply if you share the right last name. When parents shield their children from the cold reality of their own failures, they do not raise strong adults. They raise fragile dependents who shatter the moment the repo truck backs into the driveway. Conversely, look at how Stella was treated. She was expected to absorb the financial and emotional deficits of the family without complaint. Her mother Brenda utilized gaslighting not just as a defensive tactic, but as a primary parenting tool. Emotional awareness in a family dictates that parents recognize the individual worth of each child, validating their reality and protecting their security. Brenda did the exact opposite. She weaponized Stella's trust, twisting a daughter's natural instinct to seek maternal comfort into a trap designed to protect her own hidden crimes. It is a terrifying realization that the hands meant to guide a child through the world can so easily forge their signature to steal their future. Yet Stella survived. She did not survive because her parents raised her well. She survived because a different generation stepped in to provide the guidance she so desperately needed. Her grandfather, sitting at his kitchen table with his ledgers, imparted a lesson that transcended basic accounting. Paper doesn't lie. People lie. In that simple, quiet moment from her childhood, her grandfather provided the long-term guidance that her mother and uncle failed to deliver. He taught her to seek the truth, to rely on empirical evidence over emotional manipulation, and to understand that a person's true values are reflected in their actions, not their empty promises. He bypassed the toxic middle generation and handed his granddaughter the exact tool she would eventually need to defend herself. This story forces us to hold up a mirror to our own dining room tables. It asks us a deeply uncomfortable question. What are we actually passing down to the next generation? If we prioritize the preservation of a business, a house, or a social reputation over fundamental fairness, we are building castles on sand. Raising children within a traditional family structure only works if that structure is reinforced by unyielding honesty. It requires the courage to sit your children down and say, "We have failed. The money is gone. But we will rebuild. together. It requires the emotional intelligence to love your children enough to let them experience disappointment, rather than committing a moral atrocity to buy them a fleeting moment of hollow pride. A family is not defined by the acreage it owns or the cars parked in the driveway. It is defined by the safety it provides when the winter wind howls. If the people who share your blood demand that you freeze so they can pretend to be warm, they have abandoned the right to call themselves your family. If you have ever sat at a table where the food was warm, but the love was strictly conditional, or if you have ever had to become your own protector because the people meant to guard you became the threat, you understand the quiet power of standing your ground. We tell these stories because the truth thrives in the light, and because sometimes the only way to heal is to watch the paper trail balance the scales. If this narrative resonated with you, if it echoed a chapter of your own life, make sure you follow the channel Aura Vengeance. We explore the shadows of family dynamics, celebrating the moments where quiet restraint turns into undeniable justice. As the snow melts across those 40 acres in Iowa, the old farmhouse remains. The mahogany table still sits in the dining room, and the grandfather clock likely still ticks in the hallway. But the house is quiet now. The legacy they fought so bitterly to preserve through lies and forgery is gone, sold to strangers, paved over by commercial developers. It leaves us wondering about the empty rooms we might leave behind. When the final ledger of our lives is tallied and the superficial wealth fades away, what will our children find written in the margins? Will they find a history of fairness and love, or will they find a hollow signature, a broken promise, and a key to a door they no longer wish to open?